Okay, we are live streaming. Good to be with all of you who are now joining in from Facebook. Of course, you're always welcome to join in on Zoom if you want. I promise we're not so scary. All opinions and perspectives are appreciated. But let's start today, before we dive into our Torah study, with our blessing for immersing ourselves in words of Torah. Yada-dai-dai-dai-dai-dai. 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 Yada-dai-dai-dai-dai. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu לעסוק בדברי תורה, לעסוק בדברי תורה, הפוך בה, לעסוק בדברי תורה. ידעי-דעי-דעי-דעי-דעי, 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 yada-dai-dai-dai-dai. Okay, so today, and sorry, good to see you as well, coming in here. Today we are going to focus on this week's portion, which is called Kitavo, and I focused on a very small little piece of the portion, just 9 verses, that will be our focal point, because of course, as we're getting further and further into the book of Deuteronomy, Moses is throwing in all sorts of last minute information he wants to make sure the Israelites know. So there's a lot in there to discuss. So I just picked a short snippet to focus our attention. I'm going to share my screen with all of you in just a moment. Every time I go live onto Facebook, it changes what is showing. Okay. All right, so I entitled this Becoming God's People. And what we're going to look at is we're starting with these first 8 verses from the Torah portion. Is there anyone who would like to read this in the English?
I can do it.
Thank you, Ray.
Moses and the elders of Israel charged the people, saying, "Observe all the instructions that I enjoin upon you this day. As soon as you have crossed the Jordan into the land that the Lord your God is giving you, you shall set up large stones, coat them with plaster, and inscribe upon them all the words of this teaching. When you cross over to enter the land that the Lord your God is giving you, a land flowing with milk and honey, as the Lord, the God of your fathers, promised you. Upon crossing the Jordan, you shall set up these stones, about which I charge you this day, on Mount Ebal, and coat them with plaster. There too you shall build an altar to the Lord your God, an altar of stones. Do not wield an iron tool over them. You must build the altar of the Lord your God of unhewn stones. You shall offer on it burnt offerings to the Lord your God, and you shall sacrifice their offerings of well-being and eat them, rejoicing before the Lord your God. And on those stones you shall inscribe every word of this teaching most distinctly."
Okay, so let's just pause here, because why do you think it's so important for these large stones to be erected when they enter the land of Israel?
Well, this is kind of I don't know if you can hear me. This
Yes.
might be.
Yeah, go ahead. We can hear you.
I think something happened to her voice.
Oh no, did we lose you?
Hello?
Yeah, now we
Hello?
hear you again.
I don't know what's going on. We have a.
Maybe you want to come in here, Sandy. I don't know. Poor thing.
Yeah. Sandy, are you able to go with Michael? We'd love to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, all right, well, I'll get there later. All right, thank you. Thank you. All right.
As Sandy's doing that, would anyone like to, anyone have any thoughts here about why these stones are important?
Well, it would seem to me it might be somewhat symbolic, but it was my understanding that many people at the time couldn't read. So they would have to have these read to them, which would mean they would have to gather around the stones.
And maybe it just in a sense to create the permanence of everything that was passed down upon them, because this is still all one generation since leaving Egypt. And so it's trying to create kind of a permanent lesson, which I mean, our Torah is written down, so obviously that's pretty important to us. I also was curious, does it actually say iron tools in Hebrew?
Sorry, say that again.
I said it says wield an iron tool over them. Does it actually say iron? I was just curious because I guess that somewhat gives us an idea of when this was. If it was in the Iron Age.
Uh-huh. Mizbeach Adonai. That's stone. Lo tanif alehem berezel. You know what?
Somebody else is talking about.
Yeah, I can look that up in 1 second. I'm going to stop the share actually so that I can go into a slightly different version of this, which could be helpful.
Sorry about that.
Sandy wanted to say
Well, I'll
something.
just say one thing and then I'm going to run back to my room where it's more comfortable. But I was just thinking of the point in the Torah where it says, put a fence around the Torah, which kind of protects it, which isolates it, and which declares this is our Torah. Maybe it's a similar situation here with the stones.
So the stones themselves are setting up a boundary, you're saying?
Right, exactly.
Just sit here, it's fine.
No, I don't want to sit here. Thank you.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
Anything you want to say?
I have to go back. I'm sorry.
Hold on 1 second. I'm trying to get this up. And it's not working. Oh, technology does not always like me. Sorry. Let's see. Here we go. So sometimes it does this great thing on this website where you can actually click on the words and it gives you translations that are helpful, but it's not doing it right now. So I can't actually answer that question because I don't know what that word means.
Okay, no problem.
I was also looking at the iron thing, but I came at it from a different point of view. What occurred to me is if it's no iron, if there were iron tools, that would require special skills to be able to use it. But if you can only use your hands, then it's very hands-on and anyone can pick up and carry the stones and touch the stones and arrange the stones. It's not limited to a very technical or very specific skill set.
Oh, so there are now questions about how accessible this is. And that's really, really important. Absolutely.
Yeah, I would think that the words inscribed on the stones are really more important than what's going to happen behind the stones. It's the teachings that are important. It's the words that are important, not the way the altar is going to be used. I get that kind of feeling. It's like the 10 Commandments were on stones.
Yeah, and we're going to get back to exactly that, Larry, because obviously this is here the way it's written for a reason. This line, you shall inscribe every word of this teaching most distinctly. That's there very purposefully, and it's there right before we get to another line that we're going to be focusing a lot of our energies on, which I think is actually the crux of this entire teaching. So what I'd love to do is to look at a few different commentaries relating to the hewing and plastering of these stones to try to get a feel of what the rabbis say about it before we can try to figure out for ourselves what we think. Would anyone like to just read this first one?
Yeah, I'll read it. Coat them with plaster and afterwards inscribe them according to Egyptian practice. This method preserved the inscription better than the incision in the stone, which often weathered badly.
Okay, so this commentary is just giving a little bit of insight as to why they might be doing it in this particular method, right?
Right.
Let's go a little bit further and look at the Ibn Ezra while I close the door, because there's a little bit of vacuuming going on over here. Sorry for the background noise. Would anyone like to read the Ibn Ezra commentaries?
Read it.
Okay,
Thank you.
this one.
This one. Keep all the commandments.
Keep all the commandments, namely that thou shalt set thee up great stones to contain the entire Torah. The Gaon, Rabbi Sadia Gaon of
Go on.
blessed memory, said that the 613 commandments of the Torah were listed upon the stones.
Okay, if we remember looking at the text a little bit earlier, thank you so much for reading that. It says here, and on those stones you shall inscribe every word of this teaching. So Sadia Gaon is interpreting that to mean the 613 commandments,
All 6, okay.
which is a lot to write on a stone, right?
Yes.
Little teeny print.
Very, very teeny. I can imagine that couldn't be easy, especially with the tools available. But how else could this be understood?
If I could make a comment,
Yeah, please, Jim.
it seems to me if you picture coating stones with plaster and inscribe them with your finger. Now, it seems to say that the stone wouldn't be as permanent as the plaster, but in my experience, that's not the case. Maybe what it really means is inscribing them on your heart, which I think is mentioned elsewhere. And it's very reminiscent of that if you were thinking about carving with your finger in soft plaster on a stone.
So I want you to hold on to that because you're right. There are texts here that speak exactly to that kind of an idea, that really, really
Yeah.
beautiful idea. Thank you so much, Jim.
I have an idea. And that is, like the stone, when you find a stone, for the most part, it's like an unaltered, well, call it like a physical piece of God in the universe. And the Torah is the word of God, are the words of God. And maybe it's saying, don't use any ironwork on these stones, which maybe likewise is saying, don't change the words that you're supposed to inscribe on the stones, just because these are the words of the Torah, the words from God.
So you're saying like, don't be so heavy-handed with it. Is that it?
No, I'm thinking of the stones on my property and such that they're there. How did they get there? I don't know, but they have a certain shape, and they and they were just there when I moved in. Maybe they've been there for 1,000 years, but they're there because the universe has been created by what we call God, who we call God, and the Torah are the words given to Moses, to us, through Moses to us, of the words of God. So it's sort of symbolic of don't change it, don't alter it, don't mess with it, just do it or observe it.
So a respect for what's there.
It's a symbol.
Uh-huh. So you, like Jim, are thinking about the
Yeah.
inscription not necessarily being physically on the stone, despite it saying on those stones you should inscribe. You're thinking of it more as a metaphorical action.
Yes, I think Jim was somewhat different than mine, and equal or more valid than what I was saying. It's just symbolic of something that exists that man didn't create. It's just there. And as the words of the Torah, yes, I know they've been interpreted in over the millennia, but in terms of in Moses's time and such, I didn't know that they even had plaster at that point, but it's just metaphorical, I suppose.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's very, very valid.
So,
Yeah,
so
go ahead.
plaster would cover the stone, which obviously wouldn't last very long. So it would have to be redone. And then maybe there'd be an opportunity to make some changes. Who knows? But I don't think that's really where they're going here. But the 613 commandments are that's in the Shulchan Aruch, right? That's the document that has the 613. And how is that practical to do something like that? Why wouldn't they zero in on the place where they call the 10 Commandments, where it's listed twice in the Torah, and just be satisfied with that?
Yeah, and that's one interpretation, Irv, right? This is Sadia Gaon, who said it's the 613 commandments. That's his idea. That's his interpretation.
Yeah.
There are others who say, yeah, it's the 10 commandments. There are others still who could say something that's different. And you know what? We don't know what the right answer is. Perhaps they're all right. The idea of putting like a fence around this idea that Ibn Ezra says was with plaster, not because the plaster would last, but rather so that the monument of stones would last, right? It might need to be redone, but the stone underneath, that's not going to be weathered because of the plaster.
In Orthodoxy, I grew up with the idea that men didn't shake a woman's hand, or you're putting a barrier between you and the sin. Maybe this is where that comes from. This building this fence around the commandments, so that the idea is that you're not going to. You put a barrier so you can't even get close to making the sin.
I don't think that teaching is where it comes from, but it definitely is indicative of the underlying culture in other places where that's more straightforward.
Okay, thank you.
Perhaps they're just preserving it and making it holy.
So does that mean, that in order to make something holy, we have to put work into it? Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely.
Because there's something really powerful about that statement as well, right? So far, we have this idea of respect for that which is there, which Michael was bringing out, right? The sanctity of what is there. We have this idea of we have to work at it in order to create the holiness. And we have the idea of placing the commandments, inscribing them on our hearts. And all three of these are really beautiful, valid ideas that come from this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking even Ezra's first comment that you shall set up these stones to contain the entire Torah. If that were the case, you would have an enormous wall and fence, and it inscribed. I'm also thinking indicates that you can read, that you can both read and write, and that is expected, or that somebody will read to you what is there, but that there is a written record of what has been said, what God said. And you'd be expected to look at it and to read it,
Right. If it was that big, you would have no other way than look at it, right?
Pretty much.
An interesting point there. I'm not familiar with what other means were there of preserving words. I mean, was there such a thing as written language and some means of putting it onto parchment or paper or something? I have really no familiarity with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it was oral tradition, if we remember, right? That's why we have there are so many different techniques in like the Odyssey and like all of these different things. People memorized huge bodies of material and there were orators, right? Before we use the term rabbis today. The Talmud, they were called the rabbis, but there are actually groups of Jewish scholars before they were officially the rabbis that basically their names are Tanaim, repeaters, Amoraim, speakers, right? The tradition was largely an oral one. It was on stone at the very beginning, and slowly there were ways to start writing things on parchment. We have Dead Sea Scrolls. Those are really, really old. They're written on animal skin. Right? So those things were in development, but it was so expensive and so time consuming. The average person did not have any access to those things.
Right. You did have, I mean, we were just out of Egypt, and Egyptians definitely had writing in stone. I don't know if they were I don't remember if they were using animal skins, but I wouldn't be at all surprised. But again, it's limited to a certain group of people who have those skill sets, who've been trained with them. And, you know, whether or not most people read, I would guess that they probably did not. And especially not if you were a slave.
Right.
You know,
But you would hear orations. Sorry, Marla, go ahead.
That's okay. No, I'm trying so hard to interpret this. And in my mind, I'm coming up with the idea of what stones imply. And I've decided that they imply a foundation, that the Torah, you know, we're responsible for it. And it's we call it a living document, if you will, subject to change, right? Over time with interpretation and that sort of thing. It seems to me like the stone remains the stone, and that it creates an opportunity for the Torah to have some, maybe it's metaphorical, but some stability, kind of a thing. So I'm wondering, I was trying to go back to your question about, you know, why these stones and what is their purpose? And then when we talked about the use of plaster and things like that, and I learned that, you know, that's temporary, but the stone remains there. So isn't that what, maybe when you would go to like build an altar or eventually an ark, like we think of what goes on in our own sanctuary, it's like on solid ground. That's what I'm working on.
Yeah, Marla, I think that's a beautiful piece to bring in here. And when we look at this last kind of comment that I brought in from Ibn Ezra, right? He says, like, for God will aid you in conquering the land if you begin to observe his commandments. The first precept upon entering the land, namely the command to build a new altar, to give thanks to God for their starting to inherit the land. This is saying build something that is your foundation. Sadia Gaon is making the connection and saying, what is that foundation? It's Torah. It's always been Torah. It always will be Torah. These stones have Torah on them. But this foundational piece, I think, is inherent in this teaching. Let's go just a little bit further because there's a whole lot more. Sorry. These computer screens. A few more texts just to kind of bring in. Abarbanel says, the nations erect monuments to memorialize their conquest, victories, and heroes. Israel is to inscribe on stone the words of Torah. And so what is Abarbanel trying to say here with this?
It's showing a stark comparison to other peoples or other societies.
I mean, the Egyptians had the pyramids and all this stuff, but we just have these stones with the words of Torah, which are more important than castles and palaces and pyramids.
Oh, we have one God, and so we're honoring God. We don't need to put up all these memorials, you know, for the conquest and victories and all of that. So just reminding us of what's important, and that we don't need all those things. And
I think also they want us to have it in our heart as well. Something about inscribing. So it's not just permanent on the stones, but it's sort of ingrained, then it really is in your heart.
That's beautiful, Sari. Yes. And just the first piece that you said of this distinction that's being brought here, when you're talking about conquests and victories and heroes, you're talking about individuals. You're saying, it is because of me that this happened. When you have the words of Torah, you're saying, no, it's because of God.
Right.
And there's a humility there that is very, very powerful. I'm just going to take us through it a little quicker because there's a lot I want to get to, and I'm looking at the time. This is such a great discussion, though. So this comes from the Talmud. This is the rabbis with the capital R. After them, after the Talmudic rabbis, all rabbis have a lowercase r. We can never be at the level of the rabbis with the big R's. The Torah was inscribed on the stones in 70 languages, but the nations chose to disregard it. Had they accepted it, they would have been accepted into the covenant that would not have lost the land. There's a lot there. I actually don't want to go super far into that because that can take us so far askew. In fact, I kind of wish I hadn't left that in there. I'm going to go a little ahead here and then we'll be able to comment through it. Sukkah 52b, also from the Talmud, this gets to a lot of what you were saying, or two. Expose a human stone. That is a person who has a heart of stone to God's teaching, and it will be shattered.
That's nice.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perhaps when we see this symbol of humility, we see the symbol reminding us of how to live our lives in a way that is befitting to our ideals, it can shatter hearts of stone and crack them open. Of course, this cracking open idea is going to come up a lot in the High Holy Days. So any thoughts or comments on that before I take us into the next line? Okay, so the verses that we had, those 8 verses about these tablets, right? It leads us straight into this verse right here. Vaydaber Moshe, Moses and the Levitical priests spoke to Israel saying, and the word here, haskate, silence. Hear, O Israel, Ushma Yisrael. Today you have become the people of the eternal your God. So I want us to look at this one word right here, haskate. And it can have a few different interpretations. Here it's interpreted as silence. And it could be used in different ways. I know this might be a little confusing for anyone who hasn't studied Hebrew grammar, most specifically conjugations of Hebrew words or verbs. In the simple form, because basically there's roots, and depending on how you conjugate it, it gives insight into how to use the word within its context. So in the simple form, this verb could just mean he listened. It could also mean he kept silent or listened, but he feel is more reflexive. It's more of an internal kind of process. And you can see here, the conjugation with the hey, it's more like that than it is the first one. And then there's another one, he kept silent, he listened, which is more of a past kind of thing. So when you look at the word here for silence, what do you think that silence represents? They set up the stones, or they're told to set up the stones, and then once the stones are set up, silence, or be reflexive and create silence for yourself. Hear, O Israel, today you have become the people of God.
I think he's talking about be quiet. Just take the idea. What does it mean to you? What's happening to you? Don't say any words. Absorb it. Be it. Be part of it. Just be there, be part of it. Absorb, be humble. I think it says all those things, which we often have to do if we want to understand and absorb anything. It's time of silent prayer almost.
Mm. Yeah. How often do we not give ourselves that room to take that silence?
Often.
It's vital.
I mean, I know I don't do it often enough.
It's vital. In communication with anyone, it's vital to just be quiet sometimes. Absorb what is happening.
And especially at this pivotal moment right here.
Yes, right. Also, especially during the month of Elul, a time for reflection and thinking and absorbing and getting ready.
Mm-hmm.
Is it also declaring that now you have responsibility to God? Thereafter, you know, they're not just given everything, right? We talked about working, you know, hard to create certain things. And so, you know, I'm just wondering about that.
Yeah. So saying that it's a pregnant silence, right? It's not just about silence, about saying, all right, this piece is over. Now, what do I need to learn? What do I need to do?
Right, right.
Very good.
Beautiful. There's a few more Talmudic pieces, or actually just this one, and then there's some later commentaries here based on Talmud, where Rabbi Yehuda again began to speak in honor of Torah and taught, when Moses took leave of Israel on his last day in this world, he said, "Keep silence, Haskate, and hear, Israel, the day you have become a people unto the eternal your God." This is surprising. Was the Torah given to Israel on that day? Wasn't that day at the end of 40 years since the Torah had been given? Rather, it comes to teach that each and every day, the Torah is as dear to those who study it as it was on the day that it was given from Mount Sinai. So the comment is, what do you mean this is the day we became the Jewish people? Hadn't we become the Jewish people when we got the Torah? Like, what's going on here? Why is this the day? And the response of the rabbis is, well, because each day you receive the Torah. Perhaps if you take that moment for silence. And a little bit of a different idea here. This is in Yaakov, but this is based on the Talmud, Brachot as well, the first tractate of the Talmud. Rabbi Judah again opened in honor of the Torah and expounded, "Be attentive and hearken, O Israel, this day you become a people." Was the Torah then given to Israel on that day? Behold, 40 years had already elapsed, but it is stated for the purpose of inferring from it that the Torah shall always be as dear and beloved by its students as if that very day had been given on Mount Sinai. Rabbi Tanchum, son of Rabbi Chia, the man from the village of Achu, said, "You may infer it from the following. A man who is accustomed to read the Shema reads it every day, morning and evening. And if he miss but one evening, it seems to him as if he had never read the Shema. Be attentive. Organize yourself into a company for the purpose of studying Torah, because the Torah can be acquired only if studied in company."
Right. Right.
This reminds me a bit of your comment earlier, Sari, about the importance of putting work into something in order to make holiness, right?
Yes.
And the importance of community and study together.
Right, we're not in this alone.
Right. It's powerful stuff.
I think it's also a reminder that Moses, who has been our primary conduit between us and God, is leaving. And it is on us. This day is unique.
So that's something that is really important at this moment. We know this is Moses' very last day on earth right now. And these are his words to the people. It's not just about me as Moses, he's saying, right? Now it's up to you.
As someone said before, we are now responsible.
Beautiful. There's just one more text here that I'm going to bring in. This is Midrash Tanchuma, get a little smaller. When Moses and the Levitical priests spoke to all Israel saying, pay attention and listen, what is the meaning of pay attention, haskait, and listen? Be silent, has, and then break down, katate. Moses said to Israel, so it's breaking up the word, right? What does it mean? Like it's saying be silent. It means there's a silent component and there's a breaking down component. Moses said to Israel, form yourselves into individual classes, kitot, and incline your heart to hear the words of the Torah. Another interpretation, he said, pound, katetu your hearts and souls to hear the words of Torah with all your heart. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov said, the text comes to warn the priests when they perform a service not to have two hearts, one in the presence of the Holy One and one for something else. And with all your soul, nafshecha, as though someone takes your life, nafshecha. And then it gives an example of a time where someone might have done something in front of God, but acted totally the opposite way, not in front of God. So there's lots of different teachings that they're kind of throwing in here, right? Inclining your heart to hear words of Torah, being silent and breaking down so that you can make sense of things, and being true through and through, listening with your whole heart, your whole soul, not just a piece of it. So authenticity.
Wow.
That's what I was saying earlier, absorbing it deeply in your heart. That's what I had, which it's reinforcing.
Yeah, that's not an easy thing to do, right? Because we as human beings, we can get a little anxious around that. Like that's asking a lot of us. It's hard to be really that real and that authentic. It really is. We look for distractions sometimes because it's all too much. I think many of us can probably relate to that right at this moment when there's so much that's going on in our world, right? This is asking a whole lot of us. And then there's like some commentaries that are being thrown in here about what does it mean to become God's people. So we have that little piece that Rabbi Catherine brought in, right? That this is the last day of Moses's life. What does it mean to become God's people on this particular day? And there's a few different texts that I want us to go through, and then I'm just going to open it up to a more broad conversation. Would anyone like to read the Chizkuni? Don't all jump at once.
I'll read it.
Thanks, Michael.
Chizkuni. 3 covenants did God conclude with Israel, one after the Exodus, one at Sinai, and one at this time for the Sinaitic covenant had been abrogated by the sin of the golden calf. Therefore, Moses said, today you have become the people of the eternal, your God.
Okay, so this might be a little confusing as to why the Sinaitic covenant is abrogated by the sin of the golden calf. And that has to do with the way the Torah is put together. So the entire book of Exodus, it's super confusing. It is all out of order. It is not chronological. It is just there to mess with our heads. No, I don't think that's the reason. I'm not sure what the reason is, quite honestly. That's a Torah study in its own right. But what happens is there's one Exodus where we receive the Torah from God. There's one moment in the Exodus where we receive the Torah from God. There's another moment where there's the incident of the golden calf where, it's dropped. right? But that happens after the first one chronologically. So it's saying, well, after the second one, there was the golden calf. So you still didn't really fully become the people of God. You need another time in order to fully become the people of God. And guess what? This is it as you enter the land of Israel. That's what it's saying. So that's why this moment is so important.
Mhm.
If we look at Kiddushat Levi, there's some other things going on here. Does anyone want to read this? Don't worry about the Hebrew. You can totally skip over the Hebrew part.
I'll read it.
Thank you, Larry.
Moses and the priests, members of the tribe of Levi, addressed all the Israelites, saying, on this day you have become a nation for the Lord your God. Rashi, keenly aware that a statement after 40 years in the desert as God's people, a people whom he had redeemed from slavery in Egypt, must sound puzzling to the reader. Understand the words Hayom, pardon me, this day as a reminder to the people that each and every day should be viewed by each one of us as a new opportunity to become the servant of the Lord or to deepen that commitment. In fact, each breath we draw presents us with the new opportunities to do so. It is as if the call from Sinai several thousand years ago still rings in our ears. Amen. And we are invited to respond to it. This is why Moses continues to say 10 with the words.
You can go to the English there.
Okay.
You shall hearken.
Hearken to the voice of your Lord your God and perform his commandments and his statutes, which I command you this day. No new commandment has been issued on this day. As to add to his comment. The thrust of the verse is that the commandments are to be as if you had heard them on this day for the first time. You should feel as if you heard them at Mount Sinai. Well, that's beautiful poetry.
It is beautifully written, isn't it?
Yes, beautiful poetry. It's mind-boggling. It opens up your mind. It just brings back the idea that we're all at Sinai, that we're there when the Torah was given. It just feels like yesterday or today. It just feels like it. It's all new every day.
So then if that's the case, Larry, then these stones that are put up, they are as if the stones themselves are calling us to experience Mount Sinai every day.
Yes.
That every time we look at them, every time we see this symbol, we are called to say, I need to follow the 613 commandments. I need to be aware. I need to listen and pay attention, take some moment for silence and give myself the opportunity to reflect on whether I am living as my true authentic self in this moment.
Every day you observe a commandment, you save the world.
And so essentially what I want to do is just open it to conversation and conversation around these two last questions that I have here and everything else that comes to mind for everyone who's present today. One is, how do the monuments relate to the Israelites becoming God's people is number one. And two is, what symbols do we use to remind us of something that is important or something that is sacred? And how do we use them in our everyday life? And so I want us to take our own moment for silence and reflection and to come together and be able to share this with one another. And for those of you who are on Facebook as well, if you want to write something into the chat, I'd be happy to relay it to everyone who is on Zoom as well.
I'm sorry, could you bring the questions up again?
Yeah, sure. Hold on one second. Right here, how do the monuments relate to the Israelites becoming God's people? And what symbols, Sorry. What symbols do we use to remind us of something important? How do we use them? I can see if I could even copy and paste and put them into the chat. Because I'm a visual person as well. I know being able to see them can be helpful. So there it is. I put it in the chat as well.
Rabbi, where are these stones? Where are these monuments?
So there isn't necessarily evidence that these things are in existence today. We know that Israel was taken over by a lot of people over the course of many years. So I'm not aware of a specific place that we know these stones to have been erected. But certainly the symbolism of them had significance then and perhaps can have significance for us now.
So what if it was Moses' last day, then they were not yet in the land of Israel?
Right.
No, but he was telling them to do it as soon as they got into the land of Israel.
Right. Okay.
When I think about, I always think about not as a monument, but the Torah being carried around every Shabbos. And that is always a monument to me, the Torah itself being carried around, everyone standing and kissing it in their own way. That is an incredible monument.
Yeah, there's a lot of symbolism there.
Oh yeah, wow, what symbolism.
But each day and every day could be our last day. I mean, because of accident, disease, or whatever. So whether there's a monument or not, we need to, as it has been said, carry the Torah within our hearts and our actions as if this day is our last day, or might be.
Sure. Yep.
And that's what it means to me.
Yeah. I mean, our tradition here is teaching us that sometimes having a physical symbol can aid us in that quest. Right? Yeah. Sorry, did you want to say something?
Well, God is giving us, to me too, what it means that God is giving us a chance, giving the people a chance again to absorb the Torah, to follow the commandments and so forth. And it's on this day, but it's every day. Yeah, so you have a chance every day to start anew. If you didn't do what you thought you wanted to do and so forth. And for me personally, I think every day I remind myself of the blessings I have in my life and try to think of all the positive things, that are occurring and have occurred, which is not an easy thing to do because we often dwell on the negatives, and so you constantly remind yourself. But, like I look at my garden, and I am a gardener and I work hard, and it just brings me such joy. And it's it's just a reminder that every day is precious, and so live it well, and as a good person, and because to me that's what God is all about, right? To be, you can go to synagogue every day and pray every day and not be a good person. So it's about being a really good human being. And I just thought about all of this morning. When my mind wants to go towards the negative, I right away remind myself, you raised 3 wonderful, good sons. They're really good people. So I just did that this morning. So for me, that's what it all means, that God has given them a chance. The Israelites has given them a chance again, and they have a chance every single day, to follow and learn. And yes.
Yeah, what's really interesting that you brought in is that within the text, we're talking about physical symbols, but what you're doing is talking about a ritualistic symbol, that sometimes we can set up those kind of monuments for ourselves that can be the reminders that we need. And that's every bit as important.
Right. So that's how I interpret it, from the readings, and make it personal to me.
Beautiful. Yeah, Jim.
I think actually it even goes farther than that. It's for you, but how you act is a symbol to others. And it becomes just something that you become the monument if you follow what it says and you actually act that way. So that it becomes real to other people.
You become a monument.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Jim. There are teachings that each of us is a living Torah, right? How we live our lives is indicative of the teachings and the values that we have. And so to transform this ritual or this physical, maybe we have a mezuzah that does that for us, or a ketubah on our wall, or any of these physical things, or wear tzitzit. I mean, those are some physical Jewish things that we might do, or maybe we have a ritual, or maybe something else entirely, but they can help us so that we can live our lives as living Torahs.
It kind of reminds me of in general, the evolution of how we create monuments even in our own country. Because they talk about, we used to have a lot of war memorials where the idea was that you did put up some famous general, maybe some cannons and some other things, and then that would become the monument. And then with the Vietnam War, it became a wall of just the names of the people that passed away. And with the monument for the 9/11, September 11th attacks, they decided to create 2 indentations into the ground where the towers used to be, with the people's names whose lives were lost, and these individual streams of water coming together in a pool of collective grief. And I think that people have made plenty of commentary in our contemporary society about how that more accurately reflects what happened and what we need to kind of need a society to move on with and process our grief with the issue. And I think that with this kind of symbols, like we're talking about, is that the symbols being created are not of a sea being parted or a plague descending on people or any carvings of those issues. Those things definitely happened. The emphasis is to create a large monument to the words of what was going on. And in a sense of itself, large monuments without tens of thousands of words is going to be a sight to see in itself, but it reminds us what we find important and what's supposed to be important in the situation, which is Torah.
Yeah. So where do we find meaning, right? Stay tuned for Rosh Hashanah morning for more on that.
We're looking forward.
It was easy in my yeshiva days and Orthodox days. You start the day with morning prayers and tefillin, which are a physical thing, and there's a routine, and you say the Shema every night before you go to sleep. All those things were built in. I think we've lost a good bit of that. I can't think of a physical thing now. Of course, there's a mezuzah on my door, but I always forget to touch it. And it's like a great painting in your living room. You never really look at it. It's there, but So I think the physical things have gone from my existence, except on special occasions or when I concentrate on something. But so that it may be something to consider all over again.
Yeah, I mean, that's that Haskate word, right? That's the be mindful, because it could so easily just slip from our minds and stop to be there. But when we start doing it again and regularly, it can actually change us.
Yes.
There's so many people who we've known who have had Orthodox children who went back to Orthodoxy. It's not so that their beliefs have changed. It's just a commitment to those kinds of things. And if you sat down and talked to them about what their true beliefs are, they'd probably line up. But they do it because it's this physical thing. And it does have meaning, and I think it has power to change lives.
Great, great.
So I hope that all of this is just good food for thought for all of us, and thinking about where do we make meaning in our lives? Which symbols are rooting us, are giving us foundation, whether they be rituals that we do, physical things that we pay attention to, or perhaps there's other things entirely that will come up for you as you just begin to reflect on all of this. And during this Elul season, as we are 2 days away from Slichot, the High Holy Day, they're right upon us. Perhaps this is our opportunity to think a little bit about where do we want to make more kind of commitments to monuments in our lives so that we can live our lives like living Torahs. So Marla, I have no idea if you have anything, because I pulled this out of a very small piece of our Torah, but I'm curious if there is something in your hands.
Well, Rabbi Lewis goes a little bit farther into chapter 28. She reflects on verse 2. All blessings shall come upon you and take effect. She's reflecting on the fact that all these rules and laws, that we're learning about or that are being prescribed, eventually wind up dividing up the 12 tribes, she says, dividing them into two choruses, them facing each other. So her blessing for us is contentment. And I was thinking as you were teaching that indeed rituals can provide that contentment. And like Irv was saying, if you reflect and in some cases go back to what was your teaching or your learning, maybe ultimately you do find contentment. So that's what she's bringing to us today. Notice the small, perfect moments in your day. The dolphin arching in playful water games, the satisfying trill of a bird's song. Notice when serenity surrounds you, enfolds you in soft, warm security. Enter into the peace of these moments humbly. Know you have found the promised land, at least for a while. Let these unexpected moments of blessing keep you safe from the storm. Rest in the peace of nature and accept the love that is your birthright and your inheritance.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Marla. And thank you so much to all of you for being part of Torah study today. And we will be right here for another Torah study next week. Like I mentioned at the very beginning, I think before some of you were able to join, I won't be leading Torah study on September 9th. And on September 16th, although Rabbi Catherine, were you volunteering to do that?
Yes, I can do that.
Wonderful. So that is always a treat for everyone when Rabbi Catherine teaches. So I encourage you to be part of that on September 9th. On the 16th, it actually is Yom Kippur. So we're going to be a little busy that day. But the week after that, we'll come back and all be together to study Torah again. So just kind of giving you a lay of the land. And one more time for Slichot on Saturday night, we as the people committed to weekly Torah study on here are invited to take part in dressing the Torah scrolls, changing the Torah gear from their normal colorful garb to the white of the High Holy Days. And if you would like to be present to be a part of that and you are vaccinated and agree to wearing a mask the entire time, we would love for you to join. So please let me know if you haven't already. Thank you all so much.
What time should we be there?
Yeah, so that's a very good question, actually.
Yeah.
So at 7 o'clock, we're actually beginning with a short video and study, which you can be present for, and everyone else will be online. So we'll have to figure out the best way to make that work, but we will. And then at 8 o'clock is when the service actually will be. So if you want to be there just before 7, so you could be a part of that, you're welcome. If you want to come a little closer to the actual service and take part in some of the Torah study from home or whatever it is, you can certainly do that as well. All right, wonderful.
What day was that again?
Yeah.
Saturday, this Saturday evening.
Okay, so yes, it is on that we can be there.
Yes,
I would like to be there.
just the people in this group who are invited are the only ones who will be here in person. Everyone else will be online for this particular service. So you have a special invitation.